Good morning, people of God. I'm trying to reason the gifts that God has given me to extend my life and to think out of the box. And I think it began when I was a little boy, this journey of my inner eye awakening me in my dreams and the gift of prophecy. In retrospect, I was created with a sacred purpose. I know that I was born to help God extend life on earth and be an example. And beyond our current understanding, we must consider ourselves caretakers of the sacred rock that shines like a beacon in a universe where truly hope is abound. From as early as I can remember, I've seen both the future and the past. I remember dreaming of a great dinosaur trapped in a pit, something I've talked about in earlier videos. And this vision was so vivid, it compelled me to run to my parents who were waiting in a vehicle as we were exploring the national parks of our great land. And even though this was a dream, I would thrash in my bed and sleepwalk. And literally, at one moment, my mother was yelling out the window of a house in Rochester, New York. And I spun around in mid-step, only to find that I was halfway down the street, or down the sidewalk to the church. I was roaming wildly in those dreams, navigating a labyrinth of ever-changing realms, a journey through places and times, shifting like gravity would fluctuate in its polarity. And today I believe that those visions have hinted at forces beyond our waking perception, perhaps because we only excel in science while we're awake, and we have the tools that we have created, man-made, without the help of God's algorithms. The mystery of time travel and gravity still eludes us in its complete and mysterious form. The great late Billy Graham once entertained speculations that stretched the boundaries of conventional thought and Christianity, a spirit of curiosity and an openness that resonated with my parents' generation. I believe I've gone a step further, and in the heart of our community, where Christ is north, south, east, and west, I raise my voice as a prophet to chart new paths, to look back at life and to look forward and unfold exactly what I call the forerunner and pathfinder of the Holy Spirit, entrusted with insights that guide us through uncharted territory. I hope that this testimony today reminds us all that we are called to awaken our inner eyes and to embrace the divine gifts within us and to journey boldly into the unknown paths that God has given us. I'm behooved by what it says here in the Bhagavad Gita, reminding me that divine incarnations arise to restore balance. In chapter 4, verses 7 and 8 in the Bhagavad Gita, you can read more about that. And that time itself is a transformative and unstoppable force in chapter 11, verse 32. Pertaining to these human-caused fires in Southern California recently, it took just one Blarney man in the Irish firefighting department that deemed this first ignition was an act of terror and was created to cause panic in Los Angeles, where thousands of terrorists and bad guys alike poured into our country illegally due to the Biden-Harris administration. I chased up hellacious mountains into federal and Indian lands to provide air-to-ground assistance with my Starlink internet and to keep an eye out, like an owl, wisely staying up 24/7 and watching. And when I came down from the ominous trail, all the scratchy graffiti that reminds me of a John Malkovich horror movie, like I was riding with some insane culprit next to me, scratching into mirrors, toilet seats, and other places, this meaningful and coincidental replica of the artwork I was doing for Santa Monica College Center for Media and Design, which I've recently graduated from. They copied the Mickey Mouse that I was drawing. They copied the letter of my laptop, XPS 17. One fella did a little dance in front of me the way I had just animated a cartoon. And the writing was similar in every case. In every part of the city, they were like warnings of death coming. Much more than gang writings, which we see in Compton or South Central, downtown, where gangs are marking their territories from each other. But these warnings and this graffiti had a specific air about it, an eeriness of terrorism that seemed to indicate that they were out to kill the rich and famous. I went headlong into the battle as Camarillo was set ablaze. I drove out there in full force, red card volunteering, self-awarded red carding, following the fire departments into the neighborhood, and I met a slew of local gang members out in the streets trying to find outsiders and get them out of their neighborhoods, protecting their ladies. And the ladies in the local stores were actually asking questions like, "Who are you? How long have you been here? Are you here for any certain kind of business?" I felt like I didn't belong there from the moment I got in. And then when I drove out of the Jack in the Box with my meal, some gang member followed me, and he was whistling to his buddies on the street. So I snidely looked out the window and said, "Hey, I'm Irish. I'm not here illegally. I'm the guy who empties the garbage bin. So if you find anyone here that just got here, dump them into the bin, and I'll come around in the morning and pick them up." I said that lightheartedly, of course, but the gang member turned to me and he said, "I already did." They were out to avenge sevenfold. Then I pulled into the hotel, and I hadn't noticed anybody following me until I heard the bumping of some very loud bass speakers in the back of a car, and they fist bumped me with the back end of their car into my truck. When I got out, they were driving away, and ominously I thought maybe that's because they thought what I said about the garbage bin was cool enough to follow me and let me know that I am unwelcome in their town, but safe for the night. I don't know. I was safe for the night, and I did leave their town the next day. I got attacked by some explosive device, and because of that, I went to Van Nuys, where a blaze had been set the night before, and the terrorist had lit a second fire in Malibu, all the way up to Pepperdine, before they decimated the coast between Palisades and Malibu South. I went up, red carding myself again, ready to help and chase suspected bad guys around, but no one was allowed to enter the city. I pulled over to the side where the cop said I could sit, and I just waited. In the meantime, I called up the fire chief of Fruitland, Utah Fire Department, and I asked if they could vouch for me as a red-carded volunteer, but no one can get red-carded on the spot, I found out, and suddenly I had found myself with nothing to do but wait and hope. In the meantime, they were letting the conventional media, ABC, NBC, and all of those fake news media people through. I knew that they were ready to report the fire as a wildfire. See, in the first fire in Pepperdine, I had met up with as I said, a Blarney fireman, honest and truth-telling, that told me this was terrorism. And I had scoped out the whole land where they were definitely ignited by some petri dish-shaped object and all set off at the same time. There were like 8 different sites that went out from one small point on a 260-degree arc. But as I sat there in the truck trying to get back for the second Pepperdine fire, suddenly there's yelling. Hey, there's a guy that's bleeding profusely. I know this is in another sermon, but there he was, the Canadian guy. I walked up to him and he continued to ask, what happened? What happened? And I said, you must have fallen off your bike. His right ear was charred and blown in half. It was cut and bleeding. His whole head was swollen. He had suffered a concussion. But his arm and his biking suit was ripped, and his knees was pretty banged up. But still, because he didn't want any help, they deemed the guy a non-emergency, and I stood there with him, kept patching him up, asking him what he wanted to do, where he was from. He said he was staying with a girlfriend in Beverly Hills, And still they were only letting in the credentiated fake news. So, with nothing in motion, I asked him if he needed a ride, and hesitantly, after about 10 minutes, he accepted the ride. We threw his bike in the back of the truck and took off to Beverly Hills. It was quite an hour and some odd hour drive. He was really deep by the Beverly Hills Park, in fact, and it seemed suspicious that he was planning on driving all that way, but I'm sure people do. He seemed mentally acute in every way except for the fact that he didn't know how he fell. He didn't know how his ear was blown in half. And he didn't know that there was a fire. He kept asking me to repeat what had happened, and every time I said that there was a giant fire, he really wasn't aware, acted as if he hadn't ever heard about the fires in Malibu. Indeed, it was only the second one. I asked him where he was from, and he said he was from Canada. And I do actually recognize the Canadian accent, so unless he's a very good actor, he looked Canadian and sounded Canadian. But the suspicious thing was that his girlfriend was off vacationing in Hawaii, and he was down and out because of it and didn't really have a place to stay and was going back to retrieve his car, which was just parked in front of her house. That led me to suspect he didn't want to go anywhere to get medical assistance. And I kept asking him, you should really go to the hospital and get stitches in your ear. And no, I'll be all right. Does my watch work? He was more worried about his watch than his injuries. That really did seem suspicious, and I wondered for a minute, do I have a terrorist with some nefarious incentive in my truck? And I became a little afraid, because if he had been involved in the fires in Malibu, which he kept saying he knew nothing about, I didn't want to press him and end up having to take my hands off the wheel to defend my face or something, like my ear. I suffer PTSD from being a fighting man in the military, and I'm Irish mentality that you go in fighting into every situation. I was trained at Fort Knox in the Delta Force, and I've always been a person with a gung-ho go-in fighting, blowing up energy. I asked the man directly, yeah, so you weren't like trying to start a fire, were you? No. What happened? He answers, and I said, a fire, there's fires. There are? Yeah. He said, how did that happen? Now that I look back on it, there's really nothing we can do about that. The devastation goes way beyond this. I dropped him off, and because of the explosive that had been thrown at the back of my truck, I went over to Van Nuys. And there had been some kind of a fire there the night before. It was still smoldering the day I got to Van Nuys, and the same ominous graffiti everywhere. Heavenly Father, we gather here today with our hearts uplifted by the promise of your divine grace. We can celebrate the awakening of our inner eyes in this tide of change, a change only you and your infinite wisdom can set in motion. As we journey through the desert of uncertainty and traverse paths uncharted. Grant us the strength to see beyond the chaos and guide us through the booby traps and embrace us with your light and truth. May our spirits be fortified by your love, and may we walk the straight path of righteousness, even when the way is dark and the life is fraught with trails and dishonesty. In Jesus' name we ask these things. Beloved, this is our time together. It's a sacred time. It's marked by divine appointments and divine wisdom, prophetic visions, and the earliest moments of the fire up until what we have experienced and has transpired in its completeness now. In 1 Corinthians 12:10 and 1 Corinthians 14:1, to eagerly desire spiritual gifts is the call of God, especially the gift of prophecy. These words echo in my mind as I saw this great event happening before me, this labyrinth of shifting media and reality glimpses of the time and the place that I was at during these fires. And I'm behooved by this wisdom that even though I was able to foresee and to predict and to know certain things were happening, I was unable, even as a prophet, to stop anything. But that these events were unfolding and that God was raising my voice to ignite the truth that a series of human-caused terrorist attacks had happened. And it was just one single voice and a man who had told me in the beginning of the fires that this ignition was an act of terror which was designed to create panic. There's more to it. As I returned to Van Nuys, going to church, praying, and asking God for these fires to cease, but they did not. I was hanging out in the Van Nuys Forest Preserve, and a guy named Ray, a firefighter from Van Nuys, told me that his buddy had his ear blown off and was sewn back on. And it reminded me of the story of Peter, who cut off the Roman guard's ear, and then Jesus put the ear back on. I realized that this Canadian that I had suspected could have been involved in planting the bomb or could have innocently run over a booby trap, but there's no way that he would have had his ear blown in half and burnt by simply landing on his ear on the road. The road would have shredded. It was so neatly cut. And the concussion might have caught up with him as he tried to drive away and escape. He probably fell. But I don't know. I'm only speculating. And the reason why there's no water in the reservoir is partially because it's illegal to keep standing water, and they don't have a system of, like, let's say, solar-powered circulation pumps with a battery and a pump hooked up to a solar panel that keeps the water fresh. But that's not the only thing. There were damages to the sewer and water systems everywhere that there was a fire, including Brentwood and Palisades, including Malibu at the 3 different canyon spots. There was leakage long before the fire. Public record will show where this leakage, where the sewers were busted and where the water had been shut off or cut down to a trickle about a month or 2 before. I went back to Van Nuys, and there was another blaze, as little blazes were being set all over from Brentwood, where I had my mail at the time on Sunset Boulevard. And I had noticed that this graffiti followed me even to Brentwood. Then I remembered, gosh, maybe I have a chance at escaping downtown LA and up through the Sylmar area. That's pretty quiet and remote up that mountain. So I drove off, figuring that the bad guys would leave me alone if I stopped pursuing them, and off I went to Sylmar to spend a night. And I spent the night there, and the next morning, Sylmar had been set ablaze. I was busy messaging all of this to the incoming Trump administration. I told them what I had deemed was happening in Los Angeles regarding human-caused terror and intentional panic protests. I went to Sylmar, as I said, and that was the final step in thinking that there was some nefarious and ominous connection, a meaningful coincidence that fires were popping up in the way that they did in the places where I went. And the media fair was hiding this all the time. Could it be that the terrorists intentionally followed me so that by spreading the news, they might have gotten what the mayor might be referring to when she calls it publicity? They wanted to be recognized, and this is something that they were talking about in the mayor's office. And it would have been something that she could have alerted the National Guard, the police, and the NSA, and every other chair in national security forces, like I was doing on X. I warned the proper authorities over and over, and while the mayor continued the snowball effect through the media to try and ignore, at the cost of our safety, in a misguided understanding that
the situation is very dangerous, and I would never I will take the criticism before I do a publicity stunt. And frankly, a press conference at this point in time would just be publicity.
I think the neighbors, the property owners,
yeah,
and the residents. I mean, 41,000 people live within a square mile here.
Yeah,
two families share a one-bedroom apartment.
But they want to hear that something is going to be done.
They want to know it's recognized. But they want to know it's recognized.
Exactly. But if I have a choice between that and compromising something, I just have to go along with it. It's not my area of expertise. I want to make sure that you are safe. And hopefully you can read in between the lines. But I would just appreciate and it's hard for me to tell you this, but hold tight. You will understand soon.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
And when I am able to talk, I will be happy to go into great detail.
Okay. And you've got me on the street, and you're welcome to call me at any time. I'll call you right back.
No problem. And just in terms of my trip, just so you know, I'm missing 2 work days. Okay. That's it. And if President Biden extends me an invitation, I took it.
Had people been warned, they could have had the chance to go and look for booby traps or to watch out, like in Camarillo, where the local gangs had the streets. But if they had alerted the police to a terror, at least the police, the National Guard, and the firemen wouldn't have been left alone to battle by themselves. The time grew very close to Donald Trump taking office and his administration being sworn in, and I knew that a good planned and organized criminal mind would retreat before getting caught, run away. And so, once again, I began messaging the incoming administration, who had not even taken the chair yet, about the possibility of fires starting all the way from Los Angeles to San Diego and throughout the border. And the day after I sent those messages, there were San Diego blazes and the San Diego terror attacks and the panic in San Diego. And they got that under control because the terrorists were retreating And I know it was terrorists because investigating officers have exposed, and there's public video of them holding a terrorist from Syria, holding the cell phone of a terrorist from Syria in the burn area near the ocean where the fires were blazing. And the phone was ringing off the hook with peons that had been working together to help create a panic. And they were asking on the cell phone if the Syrian terrorist was still in the country. They kept these calls, and it led the investigators to many of them in the terror cell, and many, many more arrests have been made. Still, the media continues to use the word wildfires, and the ultimate blow came to ruin us. I was able to pass from Malibu to Santa Monica for my doctor's appointment, and I saw all of this graffiti. And as I stood in the Leo Carrillo, as I stood at the Will Rogers State Park in Santa Monica, the beach there, the big beach by the fire department, I looked up and the fireman said, "What do you think that is?" Colorful graffiti, like a homage to the rainbow crowd. And I said, "Well, it looks kind of woke. It's definitely not something that I've ever seen a local gang do. They usually don't draw rainbow colors. It's got a feeling that it's a pride flag or something, and it can't mean anything good." But the gift of prophecy does not control outcomes. It merely perceives what's happening and opens the mouth to speak. And I replied that it does not look like a local gang, and that it looks like something from a diversity campaign, and that it was probably some omen written by gangs to let people know they were still there. 2 days later, the entire coast from the Palisades at Santa Monica to Malibu were set ablaze as I sat here in Van Nuys. And recently, I drove that PCH and saw all the devastation that you can see in the video, where the mayor is making her excuse for not giving any promotion to the terrorists, or hiding the truth in an attempt to use media fare against the gangs to stop them from what they were doing by ignoring them. She missed the chance to get the proper authorities in Washington and state and local authorities on the job, and $100 billion have been lost. So instead of crying about it or complaining or trying to beat people up who voted for this invasion, in all due respect, for charitable reasons, I began to write the proper authorities in Washington, like the USDA and CRS, asking for $100 billion, $200 million to assist us with trees, road base, sewers, solar-powered reservoirs, circulation pumps, polyethylene or mixed styrofoam concrete building materials that would not be too heavy to build up at the top of the mountains where avalanching comes from watershed. I also asked them to, for the first time, to help us build walls throughout the Malibu canyons. And it's as if I had seen this whole thing without being able to do anything, as if I had been a time traveler, merely seeing the future but being stuck in the present and unable to go back into the past. It's time for the aid of the Trump administration. It's time to drop politics and use our foresight of these poor mountains and this wildlife, and to prepare us for the future watershed avalanches, to build back with the partnership of the USDA and CRS, the Department of Transportation. As I began to write, the torrential season began. It poured for days, washing away whole entire sections of PCH and mudslides. Today, as I'm writing this, I have driven through PCH, and I honestly want to barf. It's so sad. There's gang writing and terrorist panic, graffiti that's scratched on everywhere, and everything's painted like I'm going to kill you. In this historical moment, the fires of revelation and the call to rebuild, beloved, let me share with you my testimony. This has been the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I always tell the truth. A journey through fire fraught with signs and symbols that revealed both human misdeeds and divine intervention. I've returned here to Van Nuys. I once go to church and sought understanding. Today, how to speak about these human-caused fires that have plagued our California coastline and our community and city. In a forest preserve near the site, I sit and ponder, and in a moment of zeal, where Peter had cut off the high priest's servant, John 18:10, miraculously the medics fixed that ear, and we can, despite our doubts, fix this. I ask God to join us today as we request help from our representatives. Yes, you heard me. We need to ask for help, not complain that they're cutting off funds for the railroad, but to ask for help, investment in trees, road base, sewer repair, solar-powered reservoir circulation pumps, advanced building materials for the walls along our fire roads and the canyons that have been ravaged by watershed failures and avalanches. If I had foreseen these events for any reason at all, it was so that I would speak up about it and give you my testimony. Let this testimony be a call to awareness and action. Through the gift of prophecy, though it does not control the outcome, it grants us the clarity to speak truth in the face of chaos. May we be ever watchful and ready to rebuild, guided by divine insight and fortified by the promise that even amid human terror or natural disasters, God's truth endures. Amen.
If you close your eyes forever, I remember, yes, I remember the pearly gates of heaven. just believe. The family awaits safe by the river. Gesturing you, they reach out, inviting with silence and peace. Just like a dream, peace and unity. With the flow, yes, rivers move and tides turn like seasons. No response above, circle around like the wind. The doorway to that pearly gate, Jacob's ladder, just reach past the dusk and the dawn into eternity. And in unity, the presence of family will be free. Your sleep turns deep. Once a dream, forever blissful and sweet. We know only your heart of us, the great reality is the soul will see. Church members of the Messiah's brood. Close your eyes forever. I remember, yes, I remember the pearly gates of heaven. Just like a dream, peace and unity. Ebb with the flow, yes, rivers move and tides turn like seasons. Nourish bodies above, circle round like a Jacob's ladder, just reach past the dusk and the dawn into eternity. In unity, the presence of family will be free. Your sleep turns deep, but to dream forever blissful and sweet. We know only your heart of us, the greater reality is the soul will see. When baptized and born again, we shall meet the edge of the river. When baptized and born again, we shall meet up at the edge of the river. If you close your eyes for